This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State Extension agronomists Jeanne Falk Jones and Logan Simon are on today's show to explain the current status of wheat in Kansas. They mention how the cold snap impacted the crop and if they think it will recover. Jeanne and Logan continue the show and their conversation as they chat about how fields can differ in regions and their recommendations. Ending the show is K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan discussing the basic guidelines for pruning and how to find an arborist when the project is too big to tackle yourself. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show discussing the status of wheat. And then to talk about wheat, we're joined by K-State Extension agronomist in Southwest Kansas, Logan Simon, and K-State Extension agronomist in Northwest Kansas, Jeanne Falk Jones. Logan, Jeanne, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Happy to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby.
Jeanne, as we're looking at wheat, what have been some recent concerns?
So really, I think everybody's been fielding questions on the cold temperatures that we had. Would have been the night of March 15th, the morning of March 16th. So that Sunday and Monday morning. We had very cold temperatures across the state, actually, during that time frame, and we were dipping into some temperatures that were concerning for growth stages of our wheat. And specifically in Northwest Kansas, we had pockets of Northwest Kansas that was below 12 degrees for up to 12 hours. And let me finish that. And we got down to 0 in Cheyenne County for a brief time. And so very cold temperatures across Northwest. We were seeing cold temperatures in Northeast, temperatures with Logan down in Southwest that were quite chilly. And so I made a note of 12 degrees because we know that based on our wheat growth stages, there are certain temperatures that we watch closely, that once we dip below those specific temperatures, then that can get us into a situation where we're concerned about growing conditions on our wheat. For Northwest Kansas, we are looking at the tillering stages and then the jointing stage. We weren't really to the jointing stage, but we were a little past the tillering stage. Tillering stage is 12 degrees. 12, we say that there can be injury after 2 hours at 12 degrees. Well, we spent a lot longer than 2 hours at a lot colder than 12 degrees. And so that starts us in the conversation of what should we be looking for in the field, what's going on. I think, Logan, I'm not sure where you guys were at for growth and development. Were you guys to that jointing stage yet?
Yeah, so really varied across the southwest and south central portions of the state. In the true southwest, think west of Dodge City, very little was really to the point of jointing by the time of this deep freeze. So we were firmly still in that tillering phase. Different as you get east of Dodge City into south central, where some of the early wheat varieties that we have down there very well could have been into that jointing phase. That's typically that Harper County area is where wheat will be the furthest along, earliest in the state. So definitely where we were really concerned in the southern portions of the state with that really far along wheat.
And that 24 degrees is really the kind of that key temperature that we look for at the jointing stage. So 12 degrees and 24 degrees are really those critical stages that we start paying attention to when we're talking about growth and development this early in the growing season.
Exactly. And when we think about the below 24, the entire state got very, very cold. I know for parts of us down here, we saw lows of 5. We didn't have anybody get down to 0, but 5, 7, for example, down into our part of the state, again, west of Dodge City, we were looking at 12 hours below 24. South Central, specifically Harper County, we were 7 hours below 24.
As you guys have been talking with your growers then, what are you seeing out in their fields?
So I've been kind of across the northwest part of the state, in the very northwest corner or the western chunk of counties. As I've been walking fields, I started walking them actually Monday morning when it was so cold because you want to see what initially is going on out in the field. We're looking for ice that would be forming around stems and things like that. But then more in just like the last 2 days, I've been in the field. And what I'm finding right now is you're walking through the field and the wheat is crunching under your feet. And that is from chlorotic, so dead, dry leaf tissue that you're walking on. So you can hear the crunching as you're walking through the field. Now that is concerning, but not completely surprising because we had really good stands and across northwest Kansas. And because of those good stands, we had a lot of top growth and so a lot of leaf material. And so a lot of that was very exposed to those cold temperatures and had damage from those cold temperatures. And so that is brown and dry and crispy as you're walking through there. Now, I've been telling growers, and this is what I've been doing, is that then you take those plants and then you take all the dead and dry off the top of the plants, and then you look down closer to the base of the plant, and we're looking for regrowth. We're looking for green material. We're looking to see how those crowns look. So you take all the dead and dry off, and then you're looking for green leaf material for the regrowth. And we're actually a little bit early for doing some of this. I always tell guys 10 to 14 days. We can't tell anything for 10 to 14 days. We're getting some hints now of how things are going just because we're seeing a little bit of regrowth or not yet in some cases, but really looking for that regrowth. We're really looking to see split the stems, look at the growing point to see how it looks. We want something that looks kind of light green, almost a whitish look, very turgid. And if you see anything that is dark yellow or brown or squishy, that dark brown, yellow, or squishy is not good, but you want something that feels like it's got good water pressure in it and looks light green and seems to be having regrowth. So that's what we're looking for in the field. I would tell you across Northwest Kansas, it's a bit of a mixed bag. And part of the challenge I think that we're dealing with is also dry conditions and how well this wheat is set up to recover from this cold weather is because of we're complicating things with really dry conditions in portions of Northwest Kansas.
Similar dry conditions in the Southwest are also driving a lot of those, what we are observing. The other thing we also, especially for the southern crop, we have working on this wheat crop is infestations of the brown wheat mite, which is another factor that's causing us to have some really rough looking wheat out across the countryside. And so as we're going out and walking these fields and looking at the status of this crop, not only do we need to be looking at the health of those plants in terms of regrowth, health of the developing head, splitting some stems as we see the southern crop getting firmly into jointing, making sure that we've got have maintained the integrity of that developing head. We also need to be looking for the presence of brown wheat mites out there that are also causing some very similar symptoms as what we've seen in terms of the necrotic tissue, dead tissues from the freeze and coupled with the drought. So a lot of things really working on this crop.
How poor can the wheat crop look to where it's no longer going to recover versus hopefully it'll be fine if conditions are ideally good for the crop?
The roughest crop I've seen that it's dead was a cover crop anyway, and so it is what it is. Other than that, and that was more brown wheat mite than anything else. Other than that, I've yet to look at wheat that I'm going to say, yeah, we're done. I've yet to see a wheat crop so far that I've said we're done. We're not abandoning anything yet. I'm very reluctant to, and especially on a dryland acre, what are my options as dry as we are? I'd rather hope for rain in April and see what we can carry forward. We haven't abandoned anything.
I think we need to approach with a little bit of caution on thinking about what our wheat is looking like out in the field at this point. And I say that because even if you pull one plant and look with multiple tillers, you may see some differences in how those tillers have responded just based on a little bit of a difference in their growth stage. So if we've had some damage to the primary tiller, it's possible that primary head, it's possible that the first tiller, second tiller that's on there is still in good shape because they were just a little bit behind in growth and development. And so, and the wheat plant does what it does in the fact that it compensates for adverse conditions. And so even before we had the cold temperatures, I was out looking at wheat in pretty dry conditions, and it at that point was sloughing off the newest tillers. So we always say the last one to be formed is the first one to go. And so it was already dropping tillers because of it being in dry conditions. And so when we have a freeze event like this, where it may affect one but not another tiller, it will put the resources that it's got into that tiller that was not affected. And so it will try to have some regrowth on it. I think one of the things now, as I've been looking and working with growers, is that we'll pull up several plants and we'll just dissect all of the tillers and look at them. We may see 2/3 of the tillers are still looking healthy, although we may not see a ton of regrowth yet. But then we may see other plants where it is sloughing off tillers because of dry. And so there's some multiple things going on out in the field, and there's a lot that's happening just in a microclimate down near that root area, now close to the crown area, just because of different conditions in the field.
Those were K-State Extension agronomists Jeanne Falk Jones and Logan Simon. We're cutting to a short break, but when we come back, we'll once again be joined by Jeanne and Logan. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show and conversation with K-State Extension agronomist in Northwest Kansas, Jeanne Falk Jones, and K-State Extension agronomist in Southwest Kansas, Logan Simon. Jeanne, as we concluded the first segment, talking about microclimates and the current conditions of wheat fields, and so as we're talking and thinking about wheat fields and microclimates, how do they differ among fields?
Some fields had much more cover. They held the heat in a little bit better. We have some that are in no-till conditions. That residue is a layer of basically insulation that helps hold heat down. So if the growing points were down below that insulation layer, they were more protected. We have some wheat that is just a little further behind. It got planted a little bit later, and maybe that's in better shape than some of the stuff that was planted early, just based on where the growth stage is. So there's so much variability across the area, and we haven't hit our 2-week mark yet, and that's really when we start feeling comfortable making some more management decisions on some of this wheat. And that's a challenging thing to do, is to wait to really know what's going on out in the field. And so I don't want folks to rush to say on making these decisions, because it really is going to take a little bit of time and some conditions to really know what our regrowth is going to look like and how those growing points are affected. So I know everybody wants an answer immediately, and this is really, we have to give wheat a little bit of a chance to kind of recover from cold temperatures and then start that regrowth. Now, with some of the hot temperatures that we've had, that has hastened that in some cases, and the fact that things were getting heat stress in some cases, which is crazy to think that we're talking freeze and heat, but we're yo-yoing, from 0 to 95 degrees a little bit here. So that's, we're adding stresses to this wheat. And so, I always joke that everybody tells me wheat has 9 lives. Well, we seem to be running through some of these fairly quickly at this stage for the different stresses that we're getting from Mother Nature on this.
Absolutely. And I would just go back and reiterate what Jeanne said on planting date, as we have really seen that play out significantly down through this part of the state. Last fall, when we were thinking about planting and how early or late we could go, we had the moisture such that we could wait. We were not forced to try to get everything in early to get established with limited moisture. And so for those that took that advice and did hold off on planting, certainly we'll see that pay off this year as we have some early planted wheat, even into late August planted wheat from last fall that really, as to use the language of one of my county agents down here, we got some rank wheat, which is a term I usually use in cotton. It's rank and just very, very big. And so we will definitely see the interacting effects of things happening on the landscape, those micro climates, as Jeannie said, coupled with planting date, maturity of the variety. Your variety is going to play a big role. There's just going to be a lot of variation out there. And so every field and parts of the field will be their own unique situation.
You guys have both mentioned drought. And so how dry is it out there and its impact it's having on wheat in western Kansas?
Yeah. So Shelby, I was actually out yesterday in Gray County probing some wheat, looking exactly at what that moisture in the profile looked like. And with the evapotranspiration that we've had with this very warm late winter, spring time we've had, we've seen a lot more water use from that upper profile than we necessarily might think. I think we've all got some understanding that it's been awfully warm. We're probably using that water. So we're pretty dry down through there in that upper profile. However, as we are able to probe down and get through that drier upper portion of the profile, we've got some deeper subsoil moisture out there that our crop just right now is not making use of, as we've kind of got a lack of connection between that upper and lower profile. So that's where we've really got that lack of connection, where some rainfall that can help to wet that upper profile and connect those two sources and get that wheat to root down deeper, taking advantage of what we built up for profile with last year's fallow. Good rains will be critical as we try to move this crop forward.
I would just add that I would say probably the top 8 inches is the driest portion of that. And yes, I agree with Logan. There is some stored profile moisture below that, but our roots are just not getting down into that for the roots of the wheat crop where we are at the moment. So because of that, we're seeing really dry conditions near the soil surface. Here, a month and a half ago, middle of February timeframe, we caught rains in portions of northwest Kansas, and we're talking 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and it's making all the difference in how this wheat is really coming through the cold conditions. And so if you missed that rain in February, I think our wheat is just drier conditions in general, because we missed that 3/4 of an inch. And quite frankly, just digging wheat out of the ground right now in places it's kind of hard to get a shovel in the ground to dig it out. And so because of that, we know that it's really dry, but there is some profile down there if we can get roots down to it. And in some cases we may be catching some of that, but those are roots that have been looking for moisture for a while, probably going down that deep. So
is there anything else you'd like to share with our wheat growers?
I think the other thing is folks are making decisions on management moving forward. And specifically in Northwest Kansas, we are looking at still some herbicide applications, still some fertilizer applications. And so we still have folks who are making some decisions on this. And I would just encourage folks to look at your wheat closely and make decisions on individual fields for management going forward, depending on what herbicide we are applying. If wheat crop goes ahead and doesn't recover well from this, we've locked ourselves out of certain crops moving forward based on if you're applying a herbicide. And many wheat herbicides have some longer residual. Ally, Rave, things along those lines have longer residual. So if we're still making some of those decisions, just approach with caution on some of that, depending on how your wheat looks. Look at individual fields before you make a decision for everything across the area. I have questions, folks who are still making some decisions on top dressing wheat. We talk about a really key time for top dress. We want everything on and in the soil by the jointing stage. Well, we're approaching that somewhat quickly on some of this. And I had somebody ask me, well, what happens if our wheat crop is, droughts out or is affected by freeze? And I'm like, well, in most of northwest Kansas or the area, we are just putting nitrogen out there for the next crop at that point then. And so we kind of joke a little bit about that we're putting it in the soil bank instead of your bank account on some of that. But there is some decisions that folks are still making on some of this wheat. And because of that, I would just say approach with caution and evaluate each field, because as Logan said, there's a lot of variability across.
Jeannie, Logan, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
We sure appreciate it.
That was K-State Extension agronomist in Northwest Kansas, Jeanne Falk Jones, and she was joined by K-State Extension agronomist in Southwest Kansas, Logan Simon, as they discussed the current status of wheat in Kansas. If you'd like to read more about this subject, you can do so by checking out a recent Agronomy E-Update article in the March 19th issue titled Wheat Status, Injury Symptoms from Freeze Damage. I will also link this article in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to hear from USDA's Rod Bain and Secretary Brooke Rollins as she talks about how she was among one of those touring the largest wildfire complex in modern Nebraska history and explaining various USDA methods in response and recovery.
An overhead view of damage caused by Nebraska's largest wildfire in modern history.
You can't really absorb just how devastating and how massive it is until you've seen it from the air like we just did.
Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, joined by USDA, Nebraska congressional, and state officials on an aerial tour Monday of the Morrill Fire Complex, one of several wildfire events in the Cornhusker State this past 2 weeks. Audio courtesy of Brownfield Ag Network. The Secretary explained USDA's role in response and recovery efforts, including
through the U.S. Forest Service, USDA has aggressively mobilized firefighters, interagency incident management teams, and aviation resources to support state and local efforts,
working with state and local firefighter teams. In addition, USDA's Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area provides both standing disaster assistance for impacted producers and conservation management post-wildfire events. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We're about to cut to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but before we do, I would like to remind you about the fire category on the Mesonet website, which you can find by going to Mesonet.k-state.edu. We're now cutting to that short break.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Early spring provides a great opportunity to check trees in the home landscape to determine whether it's time to do some pruning. K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan goes over some of the basic rules for tree pruning. Matt, when it comes to tree pruning, this is actually the best time to be pruning trees?
It really is. When we're pruning, we really want to keep in mind that we are intentionally wounding and damaging our trees and shrubs by selectively removing a branch or a portion of that tree, generally for a specific purpose. And it's kind of both an art and a science, but what we really want to do at the end of the day is when we're causing this damage to the tree, we want to do so in a way that it's able to heal over as quickly as possible. And this time of year really allows a lot of new growth to come onto that tree and heal over those pruning wounds that we might make.
One of the advantages now, I guess, is the fact that we can kind of see what we're doing, what we're working with.
Exactly. With a lot of trees being deciduous and losing their leaves over the winter months, we can actually see a lot more of the shape and structure of the tree. So it's a lot easier for us to guide some of the new growth and where we want that to occur in the tree, but also really look for issues and damage that might be up in the tree, broken branches, crossing limbs, things that are rubbing or crowding out other branches. And so now's a great time to be able to evaluate the tree structure and get in there and do some of that pruning that's needed.
We're looking for aesthetics, but we're also looking for, I guess, safety?
Absolutely. Safety is always a primary concern. And one of the things that people are often looking at when pruning a tree is clearance, being able to walk under it, drive under it, make it to your front porch, for example. And with that, what we want to do is gradually prune up our trees. We never want to make big changes in the amount of the tree that we prune off at one time. So the general rule of thumb is to try to prune off no more than 1/3 of the overall branch canopy of that tree. We want to do so gradually each year because each one of those branches hosts thousands of leaves sometimes, and each one of those leaves is a solar power factory for that tree. And so by removing too many of the branches, we remove some of that tree's capacity to grow leaves and to create energy to put back into future growth of the tree.
So what are maybe some of the steps then? How do we go about doing this?
So we want to first evaluate what is the biggest priority in pruning our tree. Is it clearance? Is it thinning of the branches? Is it to remove hanging limbs? We can remove as much dead wood out of a tree at any time of the year. That's really not going to have a huge impact in the tree. This time of year, we really want to focus on structure. Typically, we want to expose no more than 1/3 of the trunk as compared to the overall size of the tree. So kind of keeping that rule of 2/3 canopy, 1/3 trunk, and trying to remove those limbs before they get up to 2 inches in diameter is really going to allow the tree to heal over those wounds as quickly as possible.
And there's a right way and a wrong way to make a cut?
For sure. There's lots of technique that goes into the cut, and that's where the science kind of comes in. Typically, when we're pruning back branches, we always want to take them back to a previous growing point. Whether that's a bud, whether that's a previous branch, or whether that's all the way back to the trunk, those are the areas where we're going to get the most healing that occurs to seal over those wounds and prevent insects and disease from entering the tree. We also want to make sure that we're using the right pruning tool to do this as well. We want to make sure that we're using hand pruners for things that are small, maybe up to 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch in diameter. Our loppers can go up to maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches if they're a really good size lopper. But anything that's 2 to 3 inches in diameter or larger, we really need to move into the saws so that we do as little damage to the tissue of that tree or shrub as possible.
And we want to make sure that we're being safe, too. So if it's something you're not sure about, you might want to consult a professional.
Absolutely. If you're feeling overwhelmed or don't know where to start, reaching out to a certified arborist is a great place to start. Typically, when we are looking for an arborist, we want to make sure they're both insured and certified. The certification isn't necessarily a foolproof way to make sure that we hire the right person, but generally they're going to have to go through a lot of training to get their certification and go through continuing education to maintain that license. And so typically in Kansas, we look for certified arborists either through the Kansas Arborist Association or through the International Society of Arboriculture. Both of these organizations will certify arborists in the state of Kansas and have lists of their certified members on their website to maybe find the arborist that's closest to you.
That's K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan with information on pruning trees in the home landscape. If you need more information, contact your local extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.